There's a decent chance that as you're watching this, there is an animal somewhere near you, asleep on a sofa, curled on a bed it isn't supposed to be on, sitting in a window judging the street, and at some point today, you probably spoke to it, out loud, in a voice you would be deeply embarrassed for another adult to hear. You said something like, "Who's a good boy?" to a creature that has never understood a single word of English and never will. You possibly asked it a question. You may have waited for an answer. And nobody thinks that's strange. Roughly half the households on this planet share their home with an animal that contributes nothing practical whatsoever. We feed them. We buy them beds and toys. We take them to doctors and spend real money keeping them alive. We grieve them, sometimes harder than we expect to, and in return they provide nothing. No food, no labor, no rent. We just love them, which raises a question that's more interesting than it sounds. How old is this? Is loving an animal a modern luxury, something you can only afford once you've got spare food, spare time, and central heating? Or is it something much older, going right back into the deep past, back when every calorie mattered and nothing was spare? And the answer is genuinely astonishing, because humans were doing this before farming, before villages, before writing, doing this before metal, before the wheel, before almost every single thing you'd call civilization. A human being was sitting beside a fire with an animal that had chosen to stay. That friendship is one of the oldest relationships our species has, and there's a grave from about 14,000 years ago that proves, as far as anything can prove it, that it wasn't about usefulness. It was about love. Let me tell you the whole story. Let's start with the big one, because it's the first and it's the most extraordinary. The dog. Here's the fact that should stop you in your tracks. Dogs came before farming. They came before we grew a single crop, before we kept a single herd, before we built anything permanent. Humans were still hunting and gathering, still fully wild, and we already had dogs. Think about the order of that. We didn't settle down, get comfortable, and then acquire pets as a bonus. We made friends with a predator while we were still living rough. Dogs aren't a product of civilization. Dogs came first. They were with us on the way there, exactly when is genuinely debated, and I want to be honest about that. Different studies, some based on ancient bones, some on DNA, land in different places, and the range is wide. Somewhere from roughly 15,000 years ago to potentially much earlier. Scientists argue about this a lot, and the picture keeps shifting. But every version of the answer is astonishing, because every version puts it before agriculture. This is the first animal we ever tamed, and we did it while we were still living the way we'd lived for hundreds of thousands of years. And here's the part I love most. We didn't domesticate a rabbit. We didn't start with something small and harmless. We made friends with a wolf, an intelligent, powerful pack predator that could genuinely kill you. Of all the animals in the world to invite to your fire, we picked one of the ones that might eat us. So how on earth did that happen? The version most people picture is that some kind-hearted caveman found an orphaned wolf cub, raised it by hand, and there we go. Dog. It's a lovely image, and it may well have happened sometimes. But it probably isn't the main story, because raising one tame wolf doesn't create a species. You need something happening over and over, across many generations. The leading explanation is far more interesting, and it's this. The wolves came to us. Picture a human camp. There's a fire, there are people, and crucially, there is waste, scraps, bones, the bits of an animal nobody wanted. From a wolf's point of view, that's a reliable, easy food source sitting right out in the open, if you're brave enough to get near it. And here's the key. Most wolves weren't. Most wolves are extremely wary of humans and keep their distance, which is a very sensible policy. But in any population, there's variation. A few individuals are naturally a bit bolder, a bit less fearful, a bit more curious. Those slightly braver wolves could creep closer to the camp and get the scraps, which meant they ate better, which meant they survived better and had more pups who tended to inherit that same lower fearfulness. Do that for generation after generation and you get something remarkable. A population of wolves that is selecting itself for tameness. Nobody planned it. No human decided to breed anything. The camp was simply a resource that only calm, human-tolerant animals could exploit. So calm, human-tolerant animals is what you gradually got. And then something genuinely strange happens, because tameness doesn't arrive alone. When you select animals for being calm around humans, you tend to get a whole bundle of other changes coming along for the ride. Often floppier ears, curlier tails, patchy coats, shorter snouts, and a face that stays more like a puppy into adulthood. There's a famous long-running experiment with foxes where researchers selected purely for friendliness toward people, and within a surprisingly small number of generations, they had foxes with floppy ears and spotted coats that wagged their tails and wanted attention. They weren't breeding for the looks. The looks came free with the friendliness, which means the reason your dog looks adorable is bound up with the reason it's friendly. Those things came as a package. And at some point, and this is the moment that matters, the relationship stopped being one-sided. It stopped being wolves exploiting our rubbish and became something mutual. Because a wolf hanging around your camp is actually useful. It notices things. It reacts to movement in the dark before you do. It smells what you can't smell. It makes an unbelievable amount of noise when something approaches. So there's a beautiful likelihood here. For a while, humans and early dogs were each getting something from the other without either fully still intending it. They got food. We got an alarm system and help finding animals and something warm to sleep against on a cold night. But somewhere in there it became something else entirely. Something with no practical justification at all. And we know that because of a grave in Germany. Real quick, if you're enjoying this, do me one small favor and hit that subscribe button. This channel is all about the surprising truth of how our ancestors really lived, and there's a new story every week. That's it. Back to the story, and I should warn you, this next bit gets to me a little. In Germany, archaeologists uncovered a grave roughly 14,000 years old. Inside it were two human beings, a man and a woman, buried together. And buried with them was a dog. Now, on its own, that's already touching. But it's what researchers found when they examined that animal closely that turns this from interesting into something that genuinely stays with you. The dog was young. A puppy, essentially a few months old, and its teeth carried the marks of serious illness. The evidence points to it having suffered a severe viral disease, the kind that leaves permanent traces on developing teeth, and it appears to have gone through repeated bouts of it while it was very young. Here's why that matters so much. A young animal that ill does not survive on its own. It cannot hunt, it's weak, feverish, probably struggling to eat, likely having seizures. In the wild, that puppy dies within days. There is no version of this where it makes it alone, but it didn't die. It survived those bouts of illness for weeks and lived on afterwards, which means somebody looked after it. Somebody kept it warm. Somebody gave it water and probably had to get food into it when it couldn't eat properly. Somebody cleaned up after it. Somebody sat with a sick animal, day after day, and refused to let it go. And now think about what that animal was worth in the coldest practical terms. Nothing. It was a sick puppy. It couldn't guard anything. It couldn't help hunt. It couldn't pull or carry or protect. It was purely as an asset, a drain, consuming food and effort and giving nothing back in return. They cared for it anyway. That's the bit that gets me. 14,000 years ago, someone sat up with a sick puppy that everyone could see was useless and nursed it because they loved it. And when it died, they didn't discard it. They buried it with their own dead in their own grave together. We have no writing from these people. We don't know their names or their language or a single thing they ever said. But we know that. We know they held a dying puppy and decided it mattered. There is no practical explanation for that. It isn't economics or utility or strategy. It's just the same feeling you have about the animal sleeping near you right now, reaching across 14,000 years and arriving completely intact. The love came that early. Right? Dogs get to be the noble first chapter. Cats are a completely different story. Cats essentially did this to us. The dog story is about wolves being drawn to our waist. The cat story requires one specific human invention: stored grain. Once people began farming and keeping food in one place, they created something that had never existed before. A huge, concentrated, permanent pile of food sitting still. And that attracted mice and rats in enormous numbers. Which, if you're a small wild cat, is the greatest thing that has ever happened. Suddenly there's a location where prey gathers reliably, in bulk forever, so wild cats moved in, not as a favor to us. Because the hunting was excellent, and that's the whole delightful shape of it. Nobody tamed the cat. Cats identified an opportunity, took it, and simply moved in next door. Humans, being humans, were presumably delighted the rodent problem got smaller, and gradually the cats stayed. Over time, the ones that tolerated people best did best around people, and something like the modern cat emerged, which is why cats behave the way they do. Dogs went through many thousands of years of being genuinely shaped by us, and it shows. Dogs are extraordinarily tuned in to human faces and human attention. Cats did far less of that, and it also shows. Your cat regards you with the polite lack of interest of a creature that came for the food and stayed for its own reasons. But, and this is the lovely bit, it clearly became affection there too, because we have burials from thousands of years ago where a human and a cat were laid to rest together. Same message as the puppy. Somebody decided this animal was theirs, and mattered, and should not be left behind. So dogs came to our fire, and cats came to our granary, and in both cases, what started as a transaction turned into a family. Dogs and cats are the famous ones, but humans have never been fussy about what we get attached to. Across cultures and across history, people have tamed and kept a huge variety of animals, birds especially, because a bird that talks or sings is irresistible to us. Young wild animals raised by hand appear again and again in accounts of traditional communities. An orphaned deer, a young monkey, a bird raised from a chick, living in camp, fed and fussed over and given a name, and here's what I find telling. In many of those cases, the animal is not remotely useful. It doesn't hunt, guard, carry, or produce anything. It's just there, living with people who like it, which tells you the impulse isn't fundamentally about utility at all. Give a human being an animal and enough spare food, and we will start looking after it. We can't help ourselves. Which brings us to the strangest question in this whole story. Genuinely, why do humans, alone among animals, take completely unrelated creatures from other species into our homes, feed them at our own expense, and love them like family? No other animal does this in any comparable way. There are occasional startling rare cases in the animal kingdom, but nothing like our worldwide habit of adopting other species. It's another one of those things that's so normal to us that we never notice how bizarre it is. There are a few pieces to the answer, and together they're rather beautiful. We are natural carers. Human babies are famously helpless, far more so, and for far longer than almost any other animal. That means we are built with an extremely powerful, easily triggered, is not fussy. It responds to a set of triggers. Big eyes, a round head, a small body, a high-pitched cry, clumsiness. Anything that pushes those buttons gets treated like a baby, and a great many young animals push exactly those buttons. Our parenting machinery is so strong that it spills over onto other species. Pets are, in a sense, benefiting from a system designed for infants. The bond is chemically real. This isn't sentimentality. Research has found that when dogs and their owners look into each other's eyes, both experience a rise in oxytocin, the bonding hormone, the same hormone bound up in bonding between parents and children. And this appears to be something dogs developed with us, over the long time they've spent at our side. Wolves don't do it the same way, which is remarkable when you think about it. Dogs have evolved to hold your gaze in a way that triggers your bonding chemistry. It's not that your dog seems to love you. There's a genuine we are relentless social creatures. Humans form attachments to almost anything. We name our cars. We feel bad for a broken toy. We get attached to houseplants. We form real emotional bonds with fictional characters who have never existed. A species this eager to bond was always going to end up making friends with a wolf. So the reason you talk to your cat in a silly voice isn't that you're odd. It's that you're running some very old, very powerful software, and it doesn't check whether the recipient is human before it activates. Here's the thought I want to leave you with, and it's the one that gets me every time. The relationship between humans and dogs has been continuous for something like 15,000 years, and possibly a great deal longer. Not interrupted, not reinvented. Continuous. Which means there is an unbroken chain of moments running from that first curious wolf edging toward the firelight, all the way to the animal in your house right now. Someone fed that wolf's descendants, and their children fed theirs, and so on. Through ice ages and migrations, through the invention of farming and writing and cities, and everything else that ever happened to us. An unbroken chain of humans and animals choosing to stay together, generation after generation, for 15,000 years with no gap. And it arrived at your sofa. The animal near you is not a modern accessory. It's the current end of one of the longest continuous friendships in the history of life on this planet. Your dog's ancestors watched us learn to farm. They watched us build the first villages. They were in the room, more or less, for all of it. And what strikes me most is that the feeling hasn't changed at all. Two people 14,000 years ago cared for a hopelessly sick puppy that could do nothing for them, then chose to be buried holding it. You would recognize those people instantly. You'd have absolutely nothing else in common, not language, not tools, not one single idea about how the world works. But you would understand that completely. So the next time you find yourself talking nonsense to an animal that has no idea what you're saying, remember that you are doing something enormously old. Older than farming, older than writing, older than almost everything. We've been doing this since we lived in the wild, and we've never stopped.